A lot of people do not like this episode of Mushoku Tensei. In fact, most of the people that dislike this episode is actually light novel readers. Not a lot of anime-onlys are complaining about this episode. There is a few, but most of it comes from the light novel readers. And I'll talk about that in just a moment. No worries, anime-onlys, no spoilers. I'm not going to spoil anyone. I'm going to keep it in line with all the content that just this episode covered, so do not worry about it. But I'm going to say, before I go any further, I like this episode. I don't hate it. I don't dislike it. I like the episode. Do I think it's perfect? No. No episode's perfect. Even the best episodes of all time have flaws. If you want to dive into it and really break it apart, you will find problems if you really look hard enough. However, that doesn't mean that, you shouldn't, critique things. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't talk about something if it does stand out and has an inherent problem. And I would be lying, I legitimately would, if I said that this episode was perfect, or close to perfect. There is some flaws with this episode. There is some things that I do want to talk about, and I think is pretty important, and does make a lot of the arguments that light novel readers valid, but I do think that there is a little bit of an over-exaggeration, so to speak. Once again, there's no problem with disliking the episode, though, but I do think that overall, this isn't a bad episode, and let's get into that, okay? This episode has a lot that happens in it. I'm just gonna do a brief little summary, okay? If we just start off at the beginning, it introduces Rudy and, he's training, he's running and all that. We get to see him working out, seeing his muscle mass and all that. And as much as we want to laugh at the scene when he starts naming his muscles, it shows that he's been really doing a heavy workout routine every single day for a very long time now, ever since probably departure with, Eris. He's been getting his body into shape. And it kind of showcases that, even though he's a mage, he's a magician, he really is trying to keep himself healthy, at the very least physically. So I do think that this is a very important moment showcasing just where Rudy's current body is at in terms of the physical aspects. Now, if we go past this moment, we go a little bit further in, we get this little scene, which once again, it can be funny and people can laugh it off, but it showcases once again Rudy's overall connection with Roxy, and even though he is praying basically to a pair of panties, it is showcasing that, he respects Roxy so much and she's always there in his time of need, like a light in the darkness, so to speak. Now, we fast forward even further, we go into the scene where he sees an individual, a group that is basically picking up a quest, saying they're going to be going to this cave and dealing with a snowdrake infestation that plays a major role later on in the episode, the second half of the episode, so to speak. But as this happens, we get the opening sequence and all that, and as the opening sequence, starts to actually play, we see brief little moments that is very reminiscent of just what, Mushoku Tensei is about. Like, for instance, I'm going to remind everybody, in Mushoku Tensei Season 1, there was constantly opening songs, but the opening song didn't have, the set static visuals. The visuals were always the events going on within the story. Like, for instance, the animators used all the actual runtime of an episode to really give as much immersion, world building, and development of the story as best as possible. And it really seems like, Mushoku Tensei Season 2 is following that route. It's not trying to cut corners, so to speak. It is trying to give as much detail as it possibly can, even in its opening song segments. Because let's just take a look at what's going on here, okay? I'm going to analyze this like I did my anime reviews back for Season 1. From this scene alone, just this one brief image, this says a lot about the current state of the town that Rudy's staying in. It showcases how they deal with the harsh winter weather. For instance, they have this monolith like this, and they have a magic circle. A mage, someone that can use mana, goes up to it, they press their hands on it, they activate it, and the, snow starts to melt. We get to see that Rudy does a little bit of hard labor as well. He, starts shoveling up snow, a bunch of people do, and this kind of showcases that Rudy's also picking up odd jobs to be able to make money. This is how he's been getting around, how he's been living, how he's been getting through the whole, innkeep, expenses, food. This really shows just how he's been able to survive to this point for all this time since he's, left Eris' side. But we get all these little details that really just kind of showcase Rudy's lifestyle at this point. This is what the whole beginning of the episode is pretty much trying to show us. And as, this little scene progresses, you just see, a girl fall down, she hurts her knee or leg, and Rudy goes up to her and he heals her. And even though this is a very, selfless act, he's helping her, there is something that you can really get from this moment as well that, I think doesn't necessarily need to be said, but it is something that, has been kind of talked about slightly in Season 1, that, mages that can heal, they usually, it costs a fortune. Like, if someone walks up to you and heals you, you're probably expected to pay them, make gold or something. And the fact that Rudy did that, probably these children in that moment probably thought they were in major debt, and they were going to have to pay Rudy. But obviously, Rudy didn't request anything like that. He healed her, and then they were on their way. And it kind of showcases his overall status in town, with the people and all that. He's making friends, trying his best, but at the same time, when you look at his very expression of how, he expresses himself, there's constant moments where you could see that he's just forcing himself to smile and just trying to, once again, keep people at arm's length, not really trying to keep people too close to him. And I think that this is a very interesting theme that is continuously played on throughout this entire episode, along with Sarah continuously watching Rudy throughout the episode and seeing kind of the actions he's doing throughout his journey. So let's get into that. Now, with this brief summary, once again, this is just the first 3 minutes. There's a lot that happens, like to this, to just going into the labyrinth and all that, to, Rudy kind of, inappropriately grabbing Sarah, and there's really not much that happens with this scene. I'll talk more about that in a second, but we have this ruins, we have a fight with the snow drakes and all that, Rudy that gets kind of left behind as well, and he thinks that, they're not going to come back and save him, like he realizes he's alone, and he feels the same, isolation and abandonment that Eris left him on, to them returning and going full circle, like a full swing of emotions. And then we have the whole scene where, the snow drakes and how this guy in this party just starts to pick a fight with Rudy and calls Rudy out, saying that, like, oh, you're faking things, you're putting on a facade and all that, your, smile's creepy, you look very depressed, calling him out for his crap, even though he's obviously not really doing a very good job of hiding it. And then, we fast forward even more. We got some stuff with Sarah and how she's apparently dead. Mimir is dead as well. And Rudy goes off just to, at the very least, recover her body to find out if she's dead or not. And we see this brief exchange where Rudy just gets rid of these new demon creatures or, monsters that we haven't actually seen. There's a lot. Like I said, there is a lot going on within this episode. There is a lot of content that this episode really tries to cover. And even this scene as well. Like, I think that this is a good scene to really elaborate on, is like this moment with Rudy and Sarah and how this exchange looks, but also what kind of happens. Because this is something that's very subtle, and they don't really try to kind of make you focus on it, but it really says a lot about Rudy's current character and his disposition after the events of Eris leaving. So, as we all know, Rudy, he's a little bit of a hound dog. We all know this. Anyone that's watched Season 1 knows this. We've seen how he is as a character. Let's just not try to act like he isn't. And anytime there's any type of female character, he acts a little bit, he acts perverted. That's how he is. And obviously Sarah in this moment, when he heals Sarah and, they're trying to get dry, cool off from the water and the rain, or not the rain, the snow, it's clear that this is a moment where Rudy could typically dive into his old self before, he had that exchange with Eris, that passionate night, so to speak. But obviously that does not happen. And it's like showcasing that obviously Rudy is not sane. He's not reciprocating the feelings back, so to speak, to Sarah, that it's very clear that Sarah feels towards him. Like, there's multiple moments within this where Sarah, like, tries to reach out to him, and she obviously can't get a hold of Rudy, and he walks off. And it showcases that Rudy's not reciprocating her feelings back to her, even though it's clear that she does have feelings for him. And either way, however you want to take this as an anime-only light novel reader, regardless if it's perfect or not, or the same or different, it's clear that Rudy, has changed a lot. He's not as driven by the passion, so to speak, of having a woman. He is doing other things. He's dealing with things in his own way. He's very depressed, and once again, keeping people at arm's length. And I think, like I said, this tells a lot with just very few words at all, and I think that's a very important aspect of this episode. Now, this final sequence showcases, once again, the growth that Rudy's having with this new group that he's traveling with. He's getting a lot better of interacting, but he's still putting on this very forced expression in this moment. And once again, this is very subtle. It's not directly stated, but once again, the episode does imply multiple times that Rudy is, he's putting on a face, a facade, and he's called out for it. So when you see that smile at the end of the episode, it's very clear, once again, he's not fully opened up to this group, but he is trying his best. He's trying to get better and all that, and he's forming a bond slowly with Sarah. And we also have this funny moment at the end, Sarah holding, Rudy's coat. There's a lot that obviously happens within this episode of Mushoku Tensei. So let's get into the actual inherent flaws. So as I talked about, this episode had a lot going on. And clearly, if you're not really going scene by scene or really analyzing or rewatching this episode, you're gonna miss a lot. You're easily gonna miss a lot of little details. Like, there's a scene briefly as well, I think that's very interesting, that I want to talk about, where Rudy's having a moment. He's at the counter and all that, and he's talking, and, obviously, he's carrying Roxy's prized possession, his holy relic, so to speak, with him, and as he, is getting nervous and all that, and he's getting a little bit frightened, he's holding it, and it just showcases, once again, he's having panic attacks, anxiety, and all that, and the only thing that's really getting him through issues is Roxy at this moment. The only person he can really latch on to allow him to even feel somewhat sane and be able to get through these days, day by day. As much as we want to write it off and laugh at it, it's clear that he is basically close to being a broken person and falling back into what he once was before he was reincarnated. Now, let's get into the flaws. So the episode, despite obviously a lot of crazy stuff, a lot of progression, and obviously it is transparent what's going on, it feels like there's an overall pacing issue. Or if it's not necessarily pacing, I would say directing issue. I feel like whoever was directing this episode, or kind of piecing together the scenes, didn't really know what they wanted to focus on, because there is so much, as I already laid out, that this episode tries to cover. Because, like, if you want to really wrap it up into one central plot, you could say it's about Sarah and Rudy kind of getting closer, or Sarah's group getting closer with Rudy. That's what you can kind of say this episode is about, but obviously that's really just not being genuine about what this episode really is covering. It's covering Rudy's fakeness, it's covering these new characters that are introduced, it's covering, Rudy's expenses of life and how he's getting day by day. There's a lot that's happening here throughout the episode, and I feel like just trying to summarize it and say it's about Sarah getting close with Rudy is just not correct. It's not. And I feel like whatever was going on, there was definitely a clash of whoever was designing this episode. There was a clash of what they should focus on, but there was one central thing I think that they could agree on, is that they wanted to get through this content as quick as possible, because I'm going to get some flack for this opinion. I'm going to 100% get flack for this, but I think it still needs to be said, and I'm going to say it. And look, I don't think, as much as, yes, I feel like a lot of this content is very important. There is a lot of important content within this. I'm not going to disagree with that. I don't think necessarily we need to spend 4 or 5 episodes on all this content, because it's not integral completely. It is important, but not completely integral to everything that's going to go on in future stuff. And I feel like them wanting to get through all this in one episode isn't necessarily a bad thing. In a perfect world, yes, I would have loved, like, just this segment alone of just this dungeon diving and all that with, Sarah's group to be, like, 2 episodes long. Just this focused entirely. I would have loved that. But this obviously isn't a perfect world, and nothing is going to be perfect. And obviously because of that, they had to cut corners. Season 1 also cut corners. People don't want to talk about that, but Season 1 wasn't perfect either with complete adaptation. There was many things they had to cut as well, just to be able to get the stuff out. And look how many people still praise the show. Hell, I praise it. And the point is that nothing's going to be perfect, and I think sometimes there's going to have to be changes and things done to be able to get an episode out. And in this case, obviously, I feel like this segment was a little bit rushed to get through it, because it's not as important as other things to come. I'm not saying it isn't important, I'm just saying it's not as. And also this content as well. I mean, this content alone could have been 2 episodes as well by itself, or just an entire episode by itself of Rudy journeying and trying to find Sarah, but obviously this was a span of like 5 minutes. So yeah, I mean, once again, there is an inherent pacing issue that this episode clearly has. And I feel like, that is definitely the major complaints that people have, but I don't think it's terrible. I don't think that this is a absolute trash episode that just destroys the very foundation of Mushoku Tensei and ruins any goodwill that people should have for it. I legitimately think that this isn't a fine episode. I don't think it's a crazy episode. I just don't think it's terrible. That's how I feel. And in terms of art and animation, I don't think the art and animation's that bad. Is it perfect? No. I just think it's still in line with it for an episode that we're trying to go with. A very, episode just showcasing Rudy's change. So yeah, I don't know. That's my thoughts on the episode. I saw a lot of people complaining about it. I wanted to talk about it. And I think that, despite those inherent issues, I enjoyed this episode. So I'll leave it at that. Let me know your thoughts on how you felt about this week's episode of Mushoku Tensei, but be safe, stay healthy, Chibi out.